Okay.
All right. Welcome to Hottest, everyone. 2021 is here, and as vaccine is supposed to help us with COVID, hot can be confusing, but Thierry Cocon is here to, like vaccine, help us understand sheaf models and constructive mathematics.
Okay, so thanks, Chris, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation. So I've been working on sheaf models of type theory, and so I thought it would be a good idea actually to present not really the technical results, but mostly the motivation. I mean, why I consider this to be an important topic. And I will present motivations on a very specific example, which is to make sense of algebraic closure of a field in constructive mathematics. So the first part will present some results of mainly of André Joyal. So how to make sense of this using Topos theory. So I will describe a Topos model where we have an algebraic closure of a field. And this model is effective. So we can do computation with this model. So it's a way actually to compute with algebraic numbers, which is interesting and which has been considered in computer algebra. And the second part, so what we get is a model of higher order logic, a Topos model. So it's a model of simple type theory with a type of proposition. So natural question, I mean, from people working in type theory is, can we refine this model to a model of dependent type theory? And that will be what I will try to present in the second part. Okay, so why this example of algebraic closure? I think, I mean, because it's a very important notion in mathematics. So, I mean, how is it used? An example how this is used. So we start from a field, for example, the field of rational, and we want to study if an equation system, given equation system, has a solution in F, so a rational solution. So in general, so this is a very difficult problem. But what we can do is to try to see if this system has a solution with complex numbers, so in an algebraic closure of the field. And this problem is much simpler, contrary to the, I mean, is there a solution in F? It's very, it can be very, very difficult, but is there a solution in the algebraic closure? So this can be decided. And then, so if there is no solution in the algebraic closure, it's fine, there is no solution in F as well. And if we find a solution in the algebraic closure, I mean, the next problem is try to descend this solution in the algebraic closure to a solution in the given field. In general, this is very difficult, but it's always very interesting. And so for instance, I mean, that's what Galois theory is about. So Galois theory says that, so if you have a solution in an extension, which is invariant under automorphism in a Galois extension, then you can descend this solution to a solution in the given field. So this is very important in mathematics. So it's a natural question to consider, can we do the same in constructive mathematics, so in constructive algebra? So what is constructive algebra and what is a field in constructive algebra? So constructive algebra, it's algebra developed using intuitionistic logic. That's a good definition of constructive algebra. And next, what we will see is algebra developed in intuitionistic type theory. And that's also what one wants to do. And what is a field in constructive algebra? So it's a discrete field. We will work only with discrete field. So it's a field such that, so it's a ring where we have one different from 0, and where given x, we can decide if x is equal to 0 or x is invertible. And there, since actually this existence is unique existence. So if there exists an inverse, this inverse is unique. And since we have one difference from 0, those two cases are, cannot happen at the same time. So actually, constructively, that will correspond to the fact that we have an algorithm which decides if x is equal to 0, or if x is not 0, it will find an inverse. And clearly, since 1 is different from 0, if x is invertible, then x is different from 0. So we have, for any x, x is equal to 0, or x is different from 0. So actually, equality is decidable. So any discrete field has a decidable equality. So that's what is a field in constructive mathematics, discrete field in constructive mathematics. So next question is, can we prove intuitionistically that any field has an algebraic closure? So, I think the first reaction to this is, well, when we prove that a field has an algebraic closure, we use Zorn's lemma, or axiom of choice. So there should be a problem somewhere. But actually, the problem is much more basic than use of Zorn's lemma. The problem is that we cannot decide if a given polynomial is irreducible or not. So, so this is very fundamental problem. And there is a very simple Kripke countermodel for this. So I want to present this countermodel. So we have two time 0 and 1. At time 0, we take f equal rational. At time 1, we take f equal rational, and we add square root of -1. So you can check that in the sense of this Kripke model, this defines a field. So we have for all x is equal to 0, or x has an inverse. So it's simple to check in the sense of this Kripke model. Yeah, and also I should say, recall what Chris said. So if you have questions, please ask a question if something is not clear about this. So but I think it should be clear that this defines a field in the sense of this Kripke model. So in particular, it's a discrete field. So if you have two elements, you can decide if they are equal or not. But what we don't have at time 0 is we cannot decide if s squared plus 1 is irreducible or not, because we don't have at time 0 that this holds or this holds, because at time 0, so for the Kripke model, it will mean that we have this, or we have this at time 0. And it's simple to check that we don't have this at time 0, because at time 1, we do have a root of -1. And we don't have this at time 0, because at time 0, we cannot find a root of -1. Okay. So this is a very simple countermodel, which shows that we cannot decide if a given polynomial is irreducible or not. So then, there is a problem at the first step of trying to build the algebraic closure. So how to make sense of the separable algebraic closure of F? So the solution, as suggested by André Joyal, is that the algebraic closure of F may not exist in our universe, but it always exists in a topos extension of this universe. Okay. And furthermore, this topos is effective, so we are still in constructive mathematics. Okay, so this is suggested in two short papers of André Joyal. Both are in French. So one paper from 75 and one paper from 82. And actually, so in both these papers, so the claim is that what we can do is we can show constructively the consistency of the first order theory of this first order theory SEF. We can show, so this is the first order theory, we can show constructively that it is consistent. And we can even build a model in a topos extension. Okay. And actually, this topos extension, it has a name. It's a classifying topos of this first-order theory SEF. So as claimed in the 82 paper of André Joyal, so this gives a primitive recursive proof of consistency of this theory. And why? So it's only sketched. And so there is a sketch of an argument in the 75 paper. And this argument is, can be described actually as an elegant algebraic formulation of quantifier elimination. And it connects actually a theorem, so Tarski quantifier elimination, to a theorem, a general theorem of Chevalet, which is the projection of a constructible set is constructible. But actually, so what I want to explain is that there is another way to prove the consistency of this classifying topos, which is to establish some kind of cut elimination result. And so this notion of classifying topos, so it's a notion from the 70s, but actually it goes back to forcing, and actually it goes back to Bethe and Kripke semantics. And so that's a forcing relation where we have, so what are the worlds? The worlds are finitely presented F algebra. And we want to describe this forcing relation, which is R forces at the first order formula psi. And this is the first order formula of the theory of this theory of algebraic closure of the given field F. So what are the clauses? How can we define this forcing relation? Well, we have the usual clause for implication and for all and for conjunctions. So what are those clauses? So that's Kripke implication. So when is an implication forced? Well, it's forced if for all extension of R, so for all map from F from R to an extension S, if S forces psi, then S forces phi. Okay. And the same for all, and the usual clause for N. And so what the crucial clauses are for the existential, disjunctive, and equality formula. So what do we do for this formula? Well, we say, so that's where we use forcing. So R forces psi, if, so we can quotient by A, or we can localize at A. So what's the idea is that we can force A to be invertible, or we can force any element A to be 0. Okay, that's why we have this clause. And similarly, so we want to force any monic polynomial to have a root. So we say that R forces psi, for psi a formula of this form, if R, what happens when we add formally a root of polynomial P, we force psi. And we have, so that's a forcing clause that's corresponding to the covering of the site, corresponding of the notion of covering of this classifying topos. And we also have so the usual clause for when is the existential statement forced, disjunction forced, and an equality forced. Okay. So that's a very simple forcing relation, which is described inductively, and which actually describe classifying topos, but in a very concrete way. And so we can prove, I mean, that if a formula is forced, if a formula is provable in the theory, then it is forced. Okay. And furthermore, for a formula which is coherent, so which was built only using existential disjunctions or equality, then a proof of R forces psi is actually a finite, looks like a finite tree. So where we can so use this clause, so that's a binary branching tree. And this clause where we have a unary branching tree where along any given monic polynomial. Okay, and then at the leaves, we have these clauses. Okay. So for getting consistency, it is enough to show that we don't have that F forces 1 equals 0. Okay. And why do we have, we don't have F forces 1 equals 0? then it's actually it's a direct proof through induction that R forces A equal B if and only if A minus B is nilpotent in R. Okay? And this follows directly from the following two remarks, that if we have a nilpotent element in an element U in R, and it becomes nilpotent when we localize at A or we force A to be 0, then U is already nilpotent in R. And similarly, so if U becomes nilpotent when we add the formal root of a monic polynomial P, then U is already nilpotent in R. So, and in the special case where R is F, and we look at F forces 1 equals 0, we get that F forces 1 equals 0 if and only if 1 minus 0 is nilpotent in F. And this is not the case since 1 is different from 0. So we get a corollary that the theory of algebraically closed fields over F is consistent. And furthermore, it's consistent because the theory of the classifying topos of this theory is consistent, and the consistency of this theory can be done in a very simple way. So remark, so that the argument suggested by André Joyal is more complex, but this information, but it gives more information, quantifier elimination, and this is illustrates the fact that so we can prove consistency without proving quantifier elimination, and actually this remark goes back. I think the first who made these remarks was Herbrand in 1930, and he made this remark actually about the theory of real closed fields. So he said that it's likely that we can prove consistency of the theory of real closed fields by quantifier elimination, and this was before Tarski. But he suggested that an argument like cut elimination can do a simpler proof of consistency of this theory. Okay. So this is a good result because the proof of consistency is very simple, but we have more actually. When we look at this classifying topos, what we get is, so it's a topos, so it's a model of higher order logic in which we have an algebraic closure. And so it's interesting actually to describe more concretely how this topos look like. And so the world of this topos, so we have to describe a site. And I said, so they are finitely presented F algebra, but actually it's enough. So when we look concretely what we need for the algebraic closure, we need only some special kind of F algebra that are the triangular F algebra. So what are the triangular F algebra? F algebra is triangular if it can be obtained by a sequence of formal monic separable extension. And so for this talk, I mean, you can forget about separable, I mean, the separable conditions. It means that all roots are formally simple roots. So P is formally have no root with P prime. So P and P prime are relatively prime in a strong sense. So an example, so for triangular algebra, so we start from F. We had the formal root of 3, square root of 3, and then we had the formal root of this polynomial where we can use x. Okay? And there I assume that the characteristic is not is not 2 and is not 3. Okay. So why it's nice to look at only at this kind of algebra? It's because of this theorem, which is I will explain why it holds. Is that if you have a triangular algebra, then you don't need. You have this very nice result that R is actually the product of the quotient algebra with the localization algebra. So this covering where you force an element to be 0 or invertible, it becomes something very simple. It becomes a splitting of the algebra in 2 parts. Okay. And furthermore, both quotient algebra and localization algebra are themselves product of triangular algebra. Okay, so here is an example. So we have this polynomial, and we had a formal root b, so which is the formal root of this polynomial. And we want to force a given element to be 0 or invertible. So what do we do actually when we have such a triangular algebra? So what you do is that you compute GCD of polynomial. So, and you can always compute GCD of polynomial. So in this case, you compute the GCD of this polynomial because you want to inverse x b minus 4 and this polynomial. Okay, so you do the computations, and then you discover that this element is already invertible because actually, when you compute the GCD, you find this equality. Okay, so the inverse is this element, and actually, you don't have anything to do when you want to localize. What is the inverse? So a more interesting example is the inverse of b minus 3. Okay, so there something happens when you try to compute the GCD of this polynomial and this polynomial. You discover actually that x minus 3 divides this polynomial. So you get this decomposition. So you discover actually that this polynomial was not irreducible. And I mean, in general, you cannot decide if a polynomial is irreducible or not. And actually, so you see that this quotient is the same as this, to do this quotient. So to force A to be 0 is the same as to force B to be equal to 3. And to force A to be invertible is actually the same as forcing B to be equal to 1. Okay. So that's what happens when you do this kind of computations with triangular algebra. Okay, so you only need to compute GCD of polynomials. And this is computable. So actually, this classifying topos, in this case, is very concrete. Computations are reduced to computation of GCD of polynomial. And as I said, so this remark goes back to work in computer algebra. Okay. So we come to the following site. Objects are triangular F algebra. Maps are maps of F algebra. And what are the covering? So we have two coverings of triangular algebra. Either we can split the triangular algebra in a product of triangular algebra, or we can add formally a root of a separable monic polynomial. So this is the site. And over this site, so we can consider the following presheaf, which is L of R, which is simply the maps from Fi, the algebra Fx, to R. Okay. So notice that with this site, actually, f of x is not in the base category because base category, it's a triangular algebra, which is obtained by adding formal root. And there, f of x, we don't have any condition on x. So fx is not a triangular algebra. Okay, but still, it's very simple to see that L is, that I defined in this way, is a sheaf. Not only a presheaf, but it's a sheaf. And why is it the case? It's because of the form of the covering. So the first covering is that R is a product of, it's a product. So then L of R is also the product of L of R1, L of Rm. So this sheaf condition on L is satisfied in this case. And the second case, it was this pullback diagram. So what happens when we add a formal root of a polynomial? What we can check is that actually this diagram is a pullback diagram. So what does it mean? It means that if you have an element in R of A, sorry, so that's a typo, that should be R of A. So if you have an element R of A, and this element, so Q of A, is equal to Q of B in R of AB. So an element in R of A it can be written on the form Q of A, where the degree of Q is strictly less than the degree of P. Then it's very simple to check that if Q of A is equal to Q of B in this algebra where I had formally two roots of the polynomial P, since P is monic, actually, so it's very simple to check that in this case, Q is constant. So it comes from actually an element in R already. So this diagram is a pullback diagram, so which means that the covering conditions for L, so this L, is satisfied as well. So L is actually a sheaf for this site. Okay, and L is algebraic closure of F in this site, in the sense of this topos of this sheaf model. Okay, and this model is effective, so we can actually compute in this model, and so for instance, and we can so take a constructive proof which use algebraic closure of a given field. And we can do the computation using this sheaf model. So I did it with Basel-Mana, actually. So I had a proof, there was a proof of, by Abiancar, actually, of Newton-Puiseaux theorem. So Newton-Puiseaux theorem, what is it? So it's, let's say, over the rational. So you have an equations, monic equations in Y, where the coefficients are polynomial in X. And then you want to find Y as a formal series in X. In general, it will be a formal series in a rational exponent of X. And what happens when you do that, actually? So you get a formal series, but the coefficients, maybe they are not in rational, they will be in an algebraic extension of the rational. Okay. And so the question was, so if you have a proof, constructive proof of this theorem using algebraic closure, can you actually compute an algebraic extension of the rationals where you have this formal series? And actually, so this works in practice. So you take the proof that you have the formal series, you look at this proof in this topos, and that what you get in is given a concrete triangular extension of the field. So in this case, if you apply the computations, you get that you do have a formal series. And so what is remarkable is that this formal series, it will be with algebraic extension, in an algebraic extension, but in a finite algebraic extension. And there, so it will be, for instance, if you do this computation, so you get this algebraic extension. And it's a typo, it should be a B instead of C. Okay, so this works, so that's good. And so what's nice in this topos is that, so it's not only a first order theory, but actually we can, so it's a simple type theory, so we can form structures. And for instance, so in this topos, we not only have access to the object L, which is the algebraic closure, but we can build new structures from L. So for instance, we can form this new structure, so formal series in rational, with rational exponent. And the theorem that we analyzed actually was this theorem about this structure, that this is separably closed. Okay, so that's nice. That's nice to have this topos and not only this first order theory. Okay. So one remark before going to type theory is that we have weak existence for algebraic closure, but we don't have strong existence. So for instance, so in characteristic different from 2, in this topos, we have that any element has a square root. So this is provable. But we don't have this square root. We don't have a square root function. So there is no functions L to L, so that if F is not algebraically closed, F is a rational, for instance. So there is no functions F from L to L, so that F of X square is equal to X. Okay, so it's the analog that you don't have continuous square root functions on complex number. Okay, this is the analog of this. And it's because, so if you have, if you try to see, I mean, why you cannot descend the square root. So the square root exists in an extension, but you cannot descend it in the field because it exists in the extensions, but it's, so you have a square root in R of A, a square root in R of B, but in R of AB, you don't have that A is equal to B. Okay? So you don't have the descent condition is not satisfied. And actually, you can check that in this topos, so this is empty. And actually, this is very simple because L is a presheaf, and you don't have natural transformations between L and L, which satisfy this in this model. Okay. So, so why it's nice, we have this topos model, but why it's not enough? Because we would like to consider more general structures. So for instance, we would like to consider the groupoid, to form the groupoid of all the L vector spaces in a given universe. And this is not possible in this topos of sheaves because we don't have access to the universe, as I presented it. Another example, you have this sheaf of invertible elements, GM. Okay, so this is an abelian group. It's a nice abelian group. In this sheaf model, we would like to form the groupoid of all GM torsors. And so actually, and this is, once again, so this is not possible because we cannot form the groupoid of all GM torsors in this topos. Okay. So the question is, can we extend the model, this model, to a model of univalent dependent type theory where we have an algebraic closure of a given field? Okay. And in such a model, so we can we have access to the Weak's existence. So I would like to be able to state and to prove that we have this actually. So this should be satisfied.
Thierry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you say that we don't have access to a universe, of course, there are Grothendieck universes in sheaf toposes. So you must mean something else. What exactly do you mean?
Yes, so I mean a univalent universe actually. And yes, so actually this is this can be part of the discussion. So, but is it a satisfactory answer to answer we don't have a univalent universe?
Yeah, yeah.
And this Grothendieck, so the top, I think the universe you are referring to in this Grothendieck topos are not univalent, right?
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So, so then the simple answer is I want a model of univalent type theory where we have this univalent universe. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that question?
Yes.
Because you say that you need universes to consider a type of, or the groupoid of all vector spaces, but maybe there are other ways to construct it as like a BGLN as a classifying object, but not an entire universe.
But then you want to be able to form this BGLN, right? Yes. Yep.
I thought maybe there is a way to construct it as a groupoid quotient.
Yep. So that's a good good question. So I cannot actually answer to it, but this can be part of the discussion then after, yeah, because maybe somebody has knows how to construct these groupoids. I mean, without in this Grothendieck topos, yes. So yep, good. Thanks. So so that's what I will discuss a little. So I will present a way to model univalent dependent type theory, and so as I said, so I want also to model this. So I want to model also some higher inductive types, in particular propositional truncation. Okay. And why do I want to do this in an effective way? Okay, I mean, it's part because I am interested in constructive mathematics, but I think also it's interesting. I like very much actually this slogan of Goodman, which is about combining forcing and realizability. And so, I mean, realizability, it's very close to do type theory in an effective way. So if we get an effective model of type theory with forcing, we have, I mean, we are in the range of combining forcing and realizability. And so this is this citation of Goodman that I find very good, actually. So because it says, if you look at forcing, so forcing, this is about a passive aspect of constructive mathematics and epistemological considerations. So this, we have stage of knowledge that are this site, by the object of this site. And this is passive. I mean, this is very interesting intuitively. And this is one aspect which is not covered in realizability. So realizability is not concerned with epistemological considerations. But what is nice with realizability is that it is active. So there are computations. So something is going on. But unfortunately, this aspect of realizability, it misses knowledge, epistemology. So what we want is to combine the two aspects, computations and knowledge. And actually, so this example of, I presented computation with in this algebraic closure, it was an example where we combined two aspects. So we have a polynomial. We want to compute the inverse of an element. And doing this computation, we discover something about the knowledge. So we discover that this polynomial was not irreducible. So that's one aspect when there is feedback between realizability and forcing. And that's what we would like to do for type theory. So we would like to combine type theory effectively and forcing. Okay. So in order to do that, so that's so I will recall, so what happens when we do from presheaves to sheaves. So when we go from presheaves to sheaves, so we have a base category and we have a collection of sieves that are given by a Grothendieck topology. And so one way to see what happens when we go from presheaf to sheaf is actually each sieve internally in the presheaf model. So each sieve defines these operations, define the T of A, which is a sub singleton, so a subset of one. And we have this monad, so exponential monad. F to the TA, it's a type of partial elements of F of extant A, where A is a truth value. And F is a sheaf. What is a sheaf? It's a sheaf if and only if. So each such eta A, map eta A is an isomorphism. Okay. And each such map, so define the monad, an idempotent monad. What we have done is actually to look at the model of dependent type theory that we have with presheaves. Where we have presheaf model of univalence, and try to combine this with covering. Okay. So I recall quickly. So how are these models of univalent dependent type theory built? So we have a category of shapes, okay, with an interval object and a cofibration classifier. And a type is interpreted as a presheaf on this base category with an extra filling structure. And so the new thing, and I think that's important idea, is that we look at vibration structure instead of looking at vibration as a property. And in this way, we can build effective model of univalence and higher inductive types. So, I mean, actually, so what I hope, actually, so is the following. So first remark, so since this approach is effective, we work with operations, filling operations. There is no problem to relativize this approach to an arbitrary preshift model. So we can replace the base category with, we can do a product with another category. We can consider this interval, okay, where it's constant with respect to the first component. And we can relativize the notion of classifier. So in this way, we can relativize this model to a preshift model. Okay, and now the questions will be how to go from preshift to shift. And what I will present, so I hope it can be done, so more generally for any constructive model of univalence. So if there are new model of univalence that are discovered, I hope what I present can be used also to build. So these models should be relativized to preshift models because they are constructive. And then we can apply the technique that I will describe. So, so I recall, so for going to preshift, from preshifts to shifts, we have the conditions that these maps are isomorphisms. So as you can guess, this will become that these maps have to be equivalent. And then we have to find a new notion of descent data. So descent data there, it was an exponential. And then we have to find a new notion of descent data for model of type theory. So what is the descent data for a sieve, S on X? So it's a collection of elements in all Fy for a map F from Y to X in the sieve, satisfying these conditions. Okay. So, but now we are in the situations where we don't have a preshift of set, but we have a preshift of types. Okay. So over a type theoretic model, F of X is now a space. So it's very natural to change the notion of descent data to the following notion of descent data. So instead of having a simple equality between this element and this element, whenever we have a map, an incomposable map F and G, we should have a path between this element and this element. Okay. And then whenever we have three composable maps, we should have a triangle connecting this element, and this element. Okay. And so at the level of groupoid, this condition with triangles, so it's a usual co-cycle conditions when you try to glue algebraic structure, where equality is isomorphisms and not strict equality. Okay, and then you have conditions for all at all levels. So whatever your model of type theory is, if you have a preshift model for this, so this is a very natural notion of descent data. Okay, and I will not go into the details. Okay, but I will leave this at this level. But in this way, we can define given a sieve, we have this notion of descent data. And then if you have an element which is given globally, clearly it defines the descent data by restriction. So we have a map like this. Okay. So what we have done, so with Fabian Roch and Christian Slattler, is that we have systematically analyzed this notion of descent data, and we have actually axiomatized this notion. So it's in this paper, which is in arXiv. So the main theorem is that so when you look at this operation, so it's an operation which is pointed, as I've explained. And the main theorem is that this theorem, there are two main theorems. The first main theorem is this one. So if D is a descent data operations, as I explained, then you have that D of eta A and eta dA are path equal, and both are equivalences. Okay? That's what you expect actually for a notion of descent data at this level. So this can be seen as a generalization of idempotent monad. So you get, for instance, that eta A is an equivalence if it has a left inverse. And we have tried to axiomatize in this paper, we have tried to axiomatize what are the properties of this descent data operation. And the main theorem, second main theorem is this theorem, is that such a descent data, so if the base category is small, such a descent data operation, so defines the left exact modality. So, and furthermore, this left exact modality preserves universe size, and each universe of modal DA types is itself modal. Okay? So that's the second main result. So left exact modality are systematically studied in this paper, so we can use this theory. But we are in a very special situations where there's modalities, so there's preserves uniform universe size, and furthermore, so each universe of modal types is itself modal. So that's a special situation. So that was discussed actually in this paper, at the end of this paper in this remark. Okay. And why is it nice to be in these special situations? Is that so actually it's even better. So if you have a collection of modal operations in this way, which are over a Grothendieck topology, and all we need is actually this Grothendieck topology is a directed poset. Then if you look at the collection of types that are modal for all modalities, then this universe is itself DA modal for all modalities. So it's good situations. And why is it good? Is that because so we get a new model of type theory where a type is interpreted by a presheaf together with a proof that this type is DA modal for all A. Okay? So that's a generalization of what you have in the usual sheaf situations when you go from presheaf to sheaves. Okay, you ask that each eta A has to be an isomorphism. Here you ask that each eta A is an equivalence. So I think it's a natural generalization of sheaf model in these situations. And this is a very general situation. So where when you have such modalities where universe of modal type are itself modal, you can always do this relativizations or internal model constructions. And this has been, I mean, this idea comes from these people, Jean-Marie Pedro, Nicolas Tabarot, and this team. And I gave two references here in the slides. So, and it's very natural. I mean, you look only at the types that are modal. But what is nice is that you get a model of type theory and also a model of univalence. Okay, and you get a model of higher inductive types. And so what you do is that you force the types to be D-modal. So for instance, if you have natural number, so maybe the type of natural number, the presheaf of natural number is not a sheaf, but you can always force it to be a sheaf by adding patch operations. So you force eta A to be an equivalence. And so what is nice is that you only need to add a left inverse, then it's automatically an equivalence. And furthermore, the types of left inverse is a proposition. So this types has a good property of being a natural number object for the types that are sheaves. And similarly, for the propositional truncations, you look at the usual higher inductive types of propositional truncations, and you add these two constructors, okay, and you force these propositional truncations to be a sheaf. So remark, so what happens with this sheaf model? So there is a special case where the topology is trivial, where you have only one descent operations, D, so you have only one covering. So in the sheaf, usual pre-sheaf case, so then in this situation, so you can check that any pre-sheaf is a sheaf for the trivial covering. Okay. That's, I mean, triviality, because you need to glue descent data into total elements, but since the sheaf, the sieve, so is trivial, you have already the total element. So there is nothing to do. Eta, the map eta is an isomorphism in this case. But in the type theoretic case, so this is not the case. So it's not even for the trivial topology, even for this descent data operations D, it's not the case that eta is an equivalence for all D. So there are simple examples where you have pre-sheaf that are not D model for this descent data operations D. And this descent data is strongly reminiscent of the Kobar operation used by Mike Schulman in this paper. But one important difference with in this setting and in what Mike is doing in this paper is that in this setting, so we start from a model of type theory, and this operations D, Kobar operation, is a left exact modality. And so this is not the case in a setting of what Mike is doing, because he doesn't have access yet to this model of type theory. I mean, he used these Kobar operations to build a model of type theory. I mean, so to finish quickly, so in this model, so you can check that this is valid. So you have a model of propositional truncations, and you can check that this is valid in this sheaf model. And so what happens? So why you can glue together the two, I mean, the given descent data is that because you do a propositional truncation and you use descent data, so it was essential to use path equality in the notion of descent data. So what happens is that in this case, so you have these two descent local object, so this element, so this square root of u and this square root of u that are R of A and R of B, but they are path related, so they are not equal, strictly equal in this at this level, but they are path related. And furthermore, so this type, it's a proposition, so it is contractible. So you have no problem with the higher coherence conditions. So this forms a descent data, and since you have a sheaf, you can glue together, patch together the descent data in a global element. So in this way, you can realize this, you can verify this statement in this sheaf model. And similarly, I mean, you can check that we have a type, which is an F algebra, but it satisfies, in this model, it satisfies these two axioms. The axiom of algebraic closure, but where it's essential to have this propositional truncation. This will not hold with a sigma. And furthermore, but for the other axiom, so the field axiom, there you don't have any problem because this existence is unique. And these two cases are disjoint, so you can replace this or by a plus and this existence by a sigma. So in this model, effective model, you have a model of dependent type theory, which is a model of algebraic closure of F. Okay. So that was the goal of this work, and it is effective. So I think it will be very interesting actually to do computation in this model. And so in the 4 minutes that are left, so I will present some research directions that I want to explore. So why is it interesting to have a model of type theory and higher types? So it's so this is one example of something. So I learned from Ulrich. So in this model, so we have this short exact sequence because any element has a square root. So this is exact short exact sequence of groups where mu2 is a group -1, 1. Okay. So as I learned from Ulrich, so whenever you have a short exact sequence like this, you can form a vibration sequence. So by doing delooping, so you get this vibration sequence. Okay. So no, and this you can do because you have you are in type theory with homotopic theory. So you can look at this vibration sequence, and you can look at the long exact sequence associated to this vibration sequence. And what you get is this sequence, okay? Because I mean, this is loop space of this. This is the loop space of this, and mu2 is the loop space of this. Okay. So then you can apply the global section functor. I mean, there are sheaves. You apply the global sections, and you get a long exact sequence of vibrations, but in the topos of in the model starting model of type theory, over which you do this sheaf model. And then you can apply, I mean, as usual. So you have this vibration sequence. You apply pi0, and you get this short exact sequence of groups. Okay. And then so you get this example of computation of pi0 of this group is this group. Okay, because this is as I said, so you can check that GM of F actually is trivial in this. So that's an example of something that you can do with when you have access to a type theoretic model of sheaves. Okay. Also, what you can do is that you can start to try to use nominal notations in this case, because as I've explained, so you get a pre-sheaf model of our product of two base category, but there is a nominal actually view of these elements. So in some cases, so you can view, so for the base category for the model of type theory, so there you can think of these are dimensions. And for the algebraic closure, so you have names actually, but there's names, no, they are algebraic quantity over which you have some constraint. Okay. So there is a very actually suggestive notations for the element of this sheaf model, nominal notations. And I think so it will be interesting to look at this and actually to simplify this model. So to connect it with Galois descent, so you can reformulate. So the sheaf conditions that you have on this site, actually there are strong conditions with Galois theory. So another way to formulate these sheaf conditions, instead of having that U of A is equal to U of B, if you add two formal roots, you can add, if you have a separable polynomial, you can add all the roots of the polynomial, and you can ask these roots to be distinct. Okay. And then this sheaf conditions is replaced by this condition, which looks like a Galois conditions, which is that if, when you have formally n distinct roots and u of x is invariant by permutations, then u of x is already a constant. And so hopefully by using these notions, I think one can simplify this descent data conditions, which is, as I presented, is very formal and is not very suggestive. And there are other possible future directions, but I think my time is finished, so I will stop here. Okay, and thank you for listening. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much. So we're gonna now thank Thierry for this great talk. Sit down and mute yourselves. You should only hear me. Okay. And now we're gonna open the floor to questions. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask the question. You can also type it in chat and I will do my best to read it. Oh, wait.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Thanks for the nice talk. Can you say a bit more about the comment you made about how even with the trivial topology, not every pre-sheaf is a sheaf?
Yes. So maybe I should go back to. Yeah, and unfortunately, so I should have. Sorry for this. So there are a simple example where you have these situations, and so I should have. So I think, yes, this is a case already over, so you look at pre-sheaf over Z over 2Z. So, okay, and this situation already, so you will have examples where a pre-sheaf is not a sheaf for the trivial topology. Okay, so, and what is, and I hope I will be able before the end of explaining. So maybe I will not be able to explain this example, but at least I can say where is the problem. So the problem is that in this notion of descent data, so we have replaced strict equality by path equality. And so what becomes descent data, even for the trivial topology? It will be, so, an infinite collection of elements. So for each map F of codomain X, we will have an element UF in F of Y. But those elements, so in particular, we have this global element U of 1. You have an element U1 in F of U identity in F of X. But there's what happens is that you don't have equality between UFG and UFG, but you have only a path between them. Okay. So then, because of this, you have only path and not strict equality. What you can check is that this map eta that you have from F to DF is not an equivalence, even in this case. So what will be the example for Z over 2Z? I think it's the following example. So as a space, so as you take the nerve of a groupoid, which has two elements, A and B. So these elements are isomorphic. So you have an isomorphism between A and B, but they are not strictly equal. So, so this is defined, and then you take the Z over 2Z actions, which swaps those elements A and B. So it's possible to check that this is a pre-sheaf. for Z over 2Z in this model. But actually, for this presheaf, the map eta is not an equivalence. And,
what is the presheaf again? Just say that.
So the presheaf is so the groupoid. So it's a, I mean, it's a nerve of the groupoid with two elements A and B.
Oh, okay.
And the Z over 2Z action is the swapping of A and B.
Mm-hmm.
So this so intuitively, so what happens is that this Z over 2Z groupoid, so it is pointwise, it is contractible because it's a contractible groupoid, but it's not globally as a presheaf. It's not contractible because it has no global element. Okay, and if the map eta was an equivalence, it's possible to show that then this groupoid will be contractible. And it's not contractible, so the map eta is not an equivalence in this case.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
And actually, that's why, I mean, the connection with Kobar operation is there. So the Kobar operations, the role that it plays is to ensure that pointwise equivalents are equivalences. And that's what we don't have in general in this presheaf model. And that's what we get when we relativize to a D modal type where D is this Kobar operation.
So maybe it could be thought of as a two-stage process. One where you first, in a sense, sheafify with respect to the trivial topology, and then you could put further sheaf conditions on if the topology is non-trivial.
Yes, so that's what I think that's what Mike Schulman is doing. So he used the Kobar operations to build this. In this case, it's to build the presheaf model, and then he can do this sheafification. Yes. And it will be possible to do it also in our case. Yes.
There's two different notions of presheaf, I guess, right? There's a strict presheaf and a weak presheaf.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's moving you from the strict presheaf model to the weak presheaf model.
Where a weak presheaf is D modal. So, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yep. Yes. Yep.
Okay, we have two questions in the chat. Maybe I'll start by reading one of them. So Dan Grayson asks, Thierry, you mentioned the computability of GCDs of polynomials in one variable over a field is relevant. What about the computability of Gröbner bases of finite sets of polynomials in several variables, provided the monomials are given an ordering?
Yes, so that will be another way to do computations. Indeed, using Gröbner basis, but there what is nice, I mean, maybe not efficient in some cases, that you need only GCD computations. But indeed, I mean, for computing in this model, if you want, you can use whatever computations you do with Gröbner basis. Will give a nice presentation may give you in a faster way, if you have good algorithm for Gröbner basis, nice presentations which will speed up the computations. Yes. Yeah.
Dan, happy or follow up?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, great. There's one more question in the chat, but maybe until, is there any live question before I read that one? Okay, then Lois Palacios, I hope I got it roughly right. When you talk about writing y in terms of x, you said in general you can consider x to the power 1 over n. Does this have something to do with the theorem of separability you mentioned a little after?
So that was, so that's a question about Newton-Puiseux. I mean, so why you need I mean, because you can consider, I mean, the equations y squared minus x equals 0, and then you need x exponent 1 over 2 there. So separability. So no, I mean it's a fact. So in general, when you want to write y as a formal series, when you have these situations and you want to write y as a formal series in X, in general, it's not possible. I mean, you have branches and you need to to consider formal series in X over 1 over n. So there, I need separably closed. Yeah, so maybe it was, actually, I don't know the classical theorem. I don't remember if in the classical situations we can forget about this. We have a more general situations where it's algebraically closed. But what I remember is that in order to get constructive proof of this result, it was essential to consider separable polynomial. So, and I think, yes, if I remember right, so the proof of Abiancar actually proves that this is algebraically closed and separable here it's introduced for constructivity reason. Not, it's not connected to this rational exponent. Okay.
Right. I think Steve has a question, so I should just let him ask.
Thierry, the example from Joyal that you began with, I should say the beautiful example, is building a topos extension that has an algebraic closure of the field that you start with. It's also a classifying topos.
Yes.
And the construction that you sketched at the end is a kind of an infinity topos extension of the field or of the topos that contains the field that you started with. And it has an algebraic closure. But I wonder if that's can be expected to be a classifying topos in the infinity topos sense, because it uses the model of type theory to build it. And in particular, it uses the universes and the pi types and everything. And that's not really in the, at least we don't expect it to be in the geometric part of infinity topos theory. I wonder if it's more like if you were to start with a topos and then do some kind of logical constructions like slicing, which are not necessarily geometric, but you could still build a topos extension in the logical sense, which has an algebraic closure. Do you have any intuition for that? Or maybe Mike or somebody else has some feeling for whether this is a classifying topos in the infinity topos sense?
So yeah, so I'm sure Mike has something to say about it. So first, I will only give a remark on this. So what André Joyal was considering, it was clearly, it was a classifying topos of this theory. And what was this theory? So it was an extension of F, which was algebraically closed. And that's the first order theory. So when later I consider this site with triangular algebra, I think, so but I'm not sure, what I described was a classifying topos of so it's not anymore a first order theory, so it's that's geometric theory. So it's a geometric theory where I add the axiom that any element is a root of a separable polynomial in coefficient with F. So any element is algebraic over F. Okay. So it was, there are two different theories that one can ask to form the classifying topos of this theory. And I don't know, so what is known about, so in each cases, so first order theory of algebraically closed extension of F or a geometric theory of algebraic closure of F, I don't know if there are results about forming the classifying topos of those geometric theory, and so maybe Mike knows something about that. Yeah.
Well, unless I'm misunderstanding, there's no such thing as a classifying topos of an arbitrary first order theory. It has to be geometric, right?
Oh yes, sorry, yes, it's a coherent theory in this case.
Oh, that's what, okay.
Yes, the coherent theory, yeah. So first theory is the coherent theory of algebraic closure. Okay. So the two axioms are the axiom of discrete field, which is a coherent axiom, and the other axiom is that any polynomial, any monic polynomial has a root, which is also a coherent axiom. And one can ask about classifying topos of this theory. And then one can ask, add the axiom, which is geometric. So any element is algebraic over F. So root of a polynomial coefficient where the coefficients are in the base field F. And this is
Got
the geometric axiom.
I mean, the infinity case, if you have some site, then the topos of infinity sheaves on that site is at least very closely related to the classifying infinity topos of the same theory, because it's like flat functors preserve truncation levels, right? So a flat functor out of a one site lands in the zero truncated objects. There's this business that I can't memorize exactly what it goes on with, like the infinity envelope that Jonas Frey was working on, and you know more about that than I do, Steve. I think that maybe it's not always exactly the same, but it should be closely related, I would think.
Okay, I guess what I was wondering about is this construction that Thierry is giving is not just a purely sheaf theoretic construction, though. On the site, he's using some kind of logical methods involving the universe, and that stuff is not going to be geometric. So I'm wondering if the construction, although it gives an infinity topos extension that has a algebraic closure in it, it might not be a kind of purely geometric extension, which is the classifying topos.
Yeah, you would need to do some kind of homotopical analysis to figure out exactly what the topos is that he's getting. Yeah. But since it's so similar to the Kobar construction, I would expect that you'd have some hope of showing it is in fact the classifying infinity topos.
That would be wonderful. Thanks.
All right. We still have 10 minutes. So.
I have another question about this one topos that you defined. I mean, why did you define it? Is it better than Joyal's topos in some sense?
I mean, so Joyal topos, so I think, once again, so he doesn't give it's only a sketch. But I think Joyal refers to the classifying topos. But then, so in one paper, he doesn't explain how to show that this classifying topos is consistent. So he says we can prove there is a primitive recursive proof of consistency. So that's in the 82 paper. So I'm not sure what argument he had in mind. And in the 75 paper, he presents an argument, so which is very close to quantifier elimination. So this variation that I presented, it's because I wanted to describe, so what you get in this way, it's not the algebraic closure. It's a field which is algebraically closed, which contains F. That's what you get when you look at the classifying topos of this theory. And I wanted to add the axiom that it is the algebraic closure. And then I think so that's the difference between the two models. And the second model I described should be a model should be the classifying topos of this theory. But this I didn't check. And the second model I presented is, I think, very suggestive, because you can think of each triangular algebra as an approximation of the algebraic closure, okay? Because you have added a finite number of elements, and each element is algebraic. So it's like a finite approximations of your algebraic closure. And the covering conditions are also very natural. And furthermore, so one can do computations with this site, and the computations are also very natural. So that's why I presented these variations of variation with respect to the classifying topos of this theory that Joyal was working with. I'm not sure if I answered your questions.
Yes, thanks. Can you say that your topos is kind of smaller in some sense than this one? Or is...
Yeah, so probably since you had it satisfy one further axiom, I mean, there are connections between the two topos, yes.
Okay.
So it should be a quotient, no? Of the first topos, yes.
All right. Any final questions? I'll give you one more second, metaphorically. Okay, maybe that's it. So let's thank Thierry for this great talk.
Thanks for the questions. Yeah.
And that's it for the first hottest of 2021, which feels awfully like 2020. And we'll see you in 2 weeks, because if it's every other Thursday during the term and not at the very beginning and not at the very end, it's hottest.
Right.